So only two can play this game, and it's from the book of John Spencer Brown. Just a few words for myself. I'm a retired professor now, but I deal with architecture quite a while. I come from production, moving to architecture, and my personal interest in these years, many years now, it's how to connect or how to use more or less the thinking of George Spencer Brown distinction into architecture. I found out that there's only one way to do this. If we have to reject the idea of synthesis in architecture, and that is, of course, a revolution. If I say that to architects, they will probably kill me. Well, metaphorically, let's say. But there's no other way. And if we think about that, architecture is really distinctions within distinctions, etc., etc. So the philosophy and the mathematics also, I think it has application to architecture. One way to move ahead and present to you some thoughts, which really are really thoughts, what I'm going to present to you, beginning of more deeper research, which started with a recent book, which is going to be publicized by Routledge on the 13th of August, so it's quite fresh. I have some ideas inside there, and I move them towards thinking about how to include GSB, George Spencer Brown laws of form, in what many people call living architecture, because what we have and what we see around us, it's especially in the modernistic era, it's rather dead architecture than living. It's less human than more human. So researching on that and including it into my book, I came across Christopher Alexander, which is a British architect who was actually died last year. He was grown in Austria and also in England, and then of course became a professor in MIT, in Boston University of Boston in the United States for many years. Alexander speaks there of that architecture is actually a process. It's a living process. It's an unfolding complexity. So let's see. And when I said, okay, how can I then combine laws of form to architecture? Reading the book, Only Two Can Play This Game, I found it at page 77, sorry, just so there. It's written in page 77, letter after. So he's writing a letter to his beloved one. And there he writes that I cannot abrogate my function as a man and put it in parentheses, I've put it in parentheses, an architect, just because it has, through years of neglect, become obscured. And it has become obscured, especially in modernistic eras. I have to find it again. I cannot save you if you throw out the baby because the bathwater is dirty. So keep the word architect and save. So if we reflect on that, on architecture, looking at the statement reflects a determination to reclaim and acknowledge the architect's inherent purpose and responsibilities, despite the challenges or neglect that may have obscured them over time. It conveys a commitment to personal growth and rediscovery of an identity. So I can then rephrase what George Spencer Brown has written as follows. I cannot abrogate, that means abolish, my function as an architect. This suggests a refusal to neglect or relinquish an architect's fundamental roles and responsibilities. Instead, there is a recognition of the need to rediscover and embrace these roles, emphasizing the importance of self-awareness and personal agency. So this metaphor actually, as far as I'm concerned, declares integrity. The metaphor, I cannot save you if you throw out the baby because the bathwater is dirty, illustrates the idea that essential elements or values should not be discarded due to superficial issues or imperfections. It encourages a discerning approach, advocating for the preservation of core principles of Christopher Alexander's notion of live architecture and live actually process, or living process, what he mentions later, even in the face of challenges or uncertainties, especially in the modernistic tradition. I cannot save you if you throw out the baby because the bathwater is dirty. Well, this statement underscores the importance of self-reflection, acknowledging the architect's responsibilities and maintaining a steadfast commitment to core values, even when external circumstances may have obscured or complicated them, for example, in modernism. It reflects a determination to navigate challenges with wisdom and discernment, recognizing the enduring significance of fundamental principles of architecture amid the complexities of life. Now, Spencer Brown goes ahead, and then in this text in the book, he defines what he calls the laws of cooperation. And I've just put them separately here to show you that there are four of them, in twos actually, because one concerns the you and the other one concerns the other two concerns the me. So to save you, I must tell you who you are, he writes. To save me, you must show me who you are. To save you, I must tell you who I am. And to save me, you must show me who I am. Now, how do these laws can apply to architecture? Well, let's see. I define here place. And in the book, I have given I've used actually the term place. But if you look at anywhere in Google, you will see many different definitions. To tell the truth, I just said, okay, a place can be anything actually. It can be also a room, a house, a neighborhood, a city, a region, whatever, the whole globe may be place. It depends which standpoint you take. So my interest concerns application to architecture, and the difference between place and environment can be understood as a distinction. So in other words, the injunction, draw a distinction, this distinction is not just any distinction, but the distinction between system and environment. The system is on one side and the environment is on the other side. What is the system? And here is my definition using of place, using Spencer Brown's notation in Christopher Alexander's Living Process. And this is inside the book, which was just mentioned, the book, which is coming up next week, actually. Now, of course, I defined the place in this way because it really illustrates, it doesn't really say many things about the mathematics of that, but it illustrates what can be a place. I mean, it's really very flexible to define depending on what we are actually designing or thinking of building or whatever. We have to think of buildings, neighborhoods, cities, and regions not separately from each other. They are really connected, as we know. And I know that in the United Kingdom, you have started some years ago now a new project on architecture and how to build cities and neighborhoods. Now, I tried here in this diagram to combine, if you like, the four laws of cooperation of in red. You see the actual words of Spencer Brown, to combine it in a feedback loop, cybernetic diagram, which combines, on the other hand, also place with architect. And the architect can be anybody. It doesn't have to be any professional one. Can be anybody. And actually, according to Christopher Alexander, he worked all his life through to set up a theory in a way, methodology of how people can embrace and can build their own homes, actually. And of course, this is a good long discussion. Now, I just wanted to mention the resume of that. Now, if you see, there are two blocks here, two rectangulars, which is one is bigger, the other one is smaller, denoting that the bigger one, for example, is denoting variety. Variety, I think we understand what variety is. Variety means many things, but basically it means in how many states a system can undertake. And Stafford Beer, he actually used this term variety in his management cybernetics. So place, it can be anything. And what we need to understand here, it can be, of course, a house, it can be it can be a neighborhood, it can be a number of houses, it can be a city, etc., etc. On the other hand, we need to, if we as people, as systems that we understand, we cannot really accept and understand, we cannot absorb the whole information that comes out of this objective that we're going to design. At the beginning, we have a lot of information coming in, so we have to attenuate this information, and you see it on the top side of this circular thing. It's like the line saying, or the word saying variety attenuator. Yeah, attenuator, it's the show part of operation rules. And the final, the arrow below, there is an amplifier. So we need to absorb or to attenuate the variety coming in. And then as designers, as people that we're trying to give a solution to a problem, then we need to sort of amplify this variety to be able to design a structure. And according to Alexander, he's talking about structure preserving transformation. So whenever we design something, we just go out there and doing as if there's nothing else existing in the surrounding. We need somehow to keep trying to preserve the structure, but then transforming it in such a way that we preserve the structure. And well, the red letters up there, these are actually the individuals. This is what I have done here. For example, this is the cooperation flow, and in any time that I go through this flow and this process, which is circular, of course, then I have some more of information that is there, decisions that have been made. So there is really a communication between, a cooperation between the architect and the place. So Alexander does that. He absorbs, he is proposing a way. It's all written in a 4-volume book, which is called the Nature of Order, about 2,500 pages, which he actually slowly, steadily describing this kind of thinking, and then at the end he proposed some kind of methodology or way of designing. Now let's concentrate on the place. The place, as I said, it can be what we just said before, can be anything. So, but the place is a form with two sides. The place is a form with two sides. This form, the place, is not just a beautiful shape or object that can be presented free of all context. Instead, it is a thing with two sides. If one wants to present a context-free object, then one is dealing with an object in an unmarked space. For example, a mark, perhaps a circle or something else, on a white sheet of paper, or something determinable in the world where other things exist as well, which, however, are not being determined in this instance. In principle, form is a matter of two sides, in our case, the system and environment. Now, a system can be called a form under the condition, and this is now what Luhmann is suggesting in his social system. So he says that a system can be called a form under the condition that the concept of form must always apply to the difference between system and environment. In architecture, the place, any place, is a system and can be called a form under the condition that the concept of form applies to the difference between system and environment. So the difference becomes apparent through the agency, in that case, of the architects, and the distinctions that she is undertaking. So it's not a synthetic process. It's a differentiation process or differentiating process. It's a continuous and unfolding process. So the actual architect, or the activity, if you like, of architecting becomes the boundary. On one side is the place, and on the other side is the environment. The architect or architecting thus becomes part of the distinction, and it's the main agent of this distinction. Alexander is introducing, in order to clarify his theory, he's introducing the notion of center. Now, it's a long discussion what is center, but the center is actually what needs to be created in order to transform structure. So he's using centers as, for example, a colon could be a center, and a window could be a center of smaller, of course, scale, but centers can be seen in different scales. Now, the center is like a communicator. If you look at it from the communication theory of Luhmann, or it doesn't really matter if it's Luhmann or somebody else, but the center is the basic distinction. So a living process that creates life. Architecture as distinctions within distinctions, or centers within centers. This is how we could think about, not synthetically, but making differentiations all the time. Alexander has developed a pattern language. He calls it pattern languages. And then later he said, okay, pattern language, it's a language that shows me basic patterns that he actually found out in different places in I don't know, 30 years of research, which he then named generic centers. So centers that are really there all the time. And he says, okay, centers now must have a connection to geometry. And then he started formulating what he called form language, which is geometry that produces geometric form. He didn't really succeed, at least he did not. He stopped there and he said, okay, this is what we should do now. The future in research is how to go from pattern languages to centers to really decide on the geometry and then define some kind of form language, which is then can be used by the architects. And this form language can give some new form. It has nothing to do with modernism in that sense. Now, architecture, as I said before, yes.
Alex, to almost give you a 5-minute warning, but also I think there's some noise in the background. Right? Yeah, 6 minutes. Noise in the background on your side, I think.
Oh, well, I'm outside here because in Greece it's still summer and not far from the sea.
Okay, yeah, you can.
I think, but it will go quickly now. It doesn't. So architecture is not a synthetic art. It's an art of distinction within distinctions. It's an art of poetic system of centers. So if so, architecture will fit into Luhmann's social system, and if that does happen, then we may be seeing a different world in architecture reality. Now, I will not go through that. I will leave it out. Centers, I define centers. Okay, I'll discuss a little bit. But let's think about centers as a kind of communication, as in between the architect and the place. And then I go and finally say thank you for your attention. And this research continues for human architecture that become everyday life. Here, at this moment, I can say that there is also some thought from my side to use Leon Conrad's storytelling analysis, or how to analyze actually existing buildings in modernism and find out what is behind that, what is really helping the human people or not, or what do they say something about their own objectivity. And thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you still have the noise behind me?
Yeah. Is there something? Because no one else is.
There's nothing here. I can.
No,
I don't have anything near me. Besides the trees and the air, the clothes, and birds, and some cats and dogs. That's it.
Okay. But yeah, that gives us a lot of time for questions here as well. Like, anyone comment? Hello, do you hear me? Hello, do you hear me?
Sorry?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Philippe Michelin. I have just a question. I want to be sure, if you said that the architect is the boundary between the place and the environment, do you mean that this is in the strict context of a building? If the architect has to build another building, he has to, of course, the environment change. He has to change herself or himself. And is that interpretation is correct? Is that what you call living architecture or architect?
living architecture. This is what you're asking? Yes. No, living architecture is opposed to death architecture. It is a term that Christopher Alexander is using. And it's using this notion because he points out, he explains that the architecture that has been built around the world for the last 40, 50 years, it's actually dead. It's not something that is human. If a person tries to live in such a places like what modernism, for example, is preaching, then he or she will be ill. It's just it's not a humanly understood architecture. And he explains that. Then he goes ahead and says that you need to be able to interact with your environment. To interact means to respond, to communicate.
Yes, but my question is,
yes.
My question is, do you mean that the architect has to change himself or herself to make another building?
To change himself. What do you mean by that? To change himself in which respect?
I mean, he cannot repeat the same patterns or things like that mechanically, He has to create and to invent. Each time he has to build another building if you want to be at the boundary between the place and the environment.
No, what I mean, it's not a boundary between the building and the environment. It's between it means that if you think about, if you try to let's say forget about synthesis, because in synthesis we have interfaces. And there, of course, it's easy to say, okay, where does the architect stand? Does it stand between the object of place and another place, or is it? So think about the architect as somebody who makes the distinctions within distinctions in the same place. But the place is not something. If you think that the place is let's call it a building. Now you have to understand that there is some other areas around. You have to design something which is going to be placed within this environment. So we need to communicate, and in order to communicate, he says, all right, he's actually using a process, a generative process, saying, okay, he describes a language. Here's a language. You can write one next to the other. If you look at the pattern language, for example, this is what he does. He creates words in order to generate something. But words means communication. It means making distinctions. I have used actually distinctions within distinction to replace the idea of synthesis in architecture. Now we may think of other things, not only in architecture, because synthesis, if you have synthesis, you have to have already things that you are synthesizing. And you need, of course, on the other hand, geometry. So, you need analysis, you need synthesis. We come, all of us come more or less from this area. At least I was started with physics and analysis and synthesis, and also in engineering. It's really very useful, and this is the way we're thinking. But in terms of distinctions, we have difficulties in thinking of how to design with distinctions, because we never taught that. I mean, the universities never teach how to go outside of synthesis. In economics, we're still talking about combining, okay, but existing things, right? So how do you create something from nothing? It's not only, but George Spencer Brown has defined that, through distinction, draw a distinction. distinction. So, and it's actually, if you think about it, the process of designing, it's a differentiating process that at the end, finally, it individualizes whatever you do. Synthesis does not do that. Really. I mean, we're talking about a lot of imagination going into arts, and architecture is part of the art, but it's, as far as I'm concerned, my position here, I'm more or less convinced that if we look at architecture as a synthetic art, we're running into trouble. I don't know whether I have replied to your question.
All right, thank you. Any other? Like, we would have time for one more brief question, if someone has one. Okay, I don't see one. So let's thank Alexander again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you too.